Just put her over there, by the kitchen. She won't mind. My son Mark's voice cut through the music. I stood in my new lavender dress, holding a small beaded purse. The wedding planner, a young woman with a clipboard, nodded. She didn't even look at me. I watched them walk away, toward the head table decorated with waterfalls of white roses. My table was not decorated with roses. It was a small, round table, pressed against the swinging doors of the hotel kitchen. I walked over. The tablecloth was slightly damp. Every time the door swung open, I got a blast of hot air that smelled of dish soap and garlic. I could hear the cooks yelling, the angry clatter of pots. I sat down. The chair wobbled. From there, I had a perfect view of my son laughing with his new bride, Jessica. He raised his champagne glass. He never once looked my way. I smoothed my dress over my knees. My hands felt cold, even with the heat from the kitchen. I had paid for the deposit on this very room. I remembered the day clearly. It was at the bank, a year ago. The air conditioning hummed so loud it made my teeth ache. I sat on a stiff leather chair. Mark and Jessica sat across from the loan officer, their hands clasped together. They looked so young, so hopeful. They wanted a house in a neighborhood I couldn't even afford to drive through. Her credit is excellent, the bankman said, looking at my file, not at me. But the debt to income for you two is just too high. Jessica's face fell. Mark squeezed her hand. Mum, he said, turning to me. His eyes were the same blue as his father's. We can't do this without you. You're our safety net. He pushed a stack of papers across the polished desk. You just have to co-sign and help with the down payment. It's just a formality. Jessica gave me a bright, tight smile. We'll make every payment, Helen. We promise. I picked up the heavy pen. The ink was a deep, permanent black. I signed my name next to theirs, securing their future with my past. 2 months before the wedding, my living room was buried in boxes. Piles of expensive, cream-colored envelopes covered my coffee table. Jessica had dropped them off with a kiss on my cheek. You have such lovely handwriting, Helen, she'd said. It would mean so much. So I sat for days, my fingers cramping around a calligraphy pen. I wrote out 200 names and addresses. My own name was not on the main invitation, only on a small, separate card that mentioned the parents. While I wrote, Jessica was on the phone in my kitchen, pacing back and forth on my clean linoleum floor. An ice sculpture, she said into her phone, her voice high with excitement. Yes, the big swan, of course. A pause. No, the budget is fine. Mark's mom is helping out. That's what grandmas are for. I pretended not to hear. I dipped the pen in the inkwell. The bottle was almost empty. I carefully wrote another address, for a cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years. The paper felt thick and heavy in my hand, like a bill I had already agreed to pay. Back at the wedding, the band started a slow song. Mark led Jessica to the dance floor. They looked beautiful. The spotlight followed them, making Jessica's diamond necklace sparkle. I paid for that necklace. It was her something new. She had pointed it out in a catalogue, and Mark had called me the next day. She just loves it, Mum. It would make her so happy. A waiter rushed past, bumping my chair hard. The kitchen door swung open, and I heard a plate smash on the floor, followed by a curse. The smell of burnt butter washed over me. No one at my table said a word. We were 3 distant cousins and a friend of Jessica's mother who had arrived late. We watched the happy couple, separated from them by a sea of flowers and laughter. I took a sip of water. It was lukewarm. I looked at my son's smiling face, illuminated by the spotlight. He seemed so far away, like a man on a television screen. And in the quiet hum of the kitchen fans and the distant music, a decision settled in my heart. It wasn't angry. It was calm and clear, like a window pane after a good spring cleaning. When the speeches started, I listened quietly. Jessica's father spoke. The best man told a clumsy joke. Then the maid of honor cried a little. When she finished, there was a pause. Before the DJ could start the music again, I stood up. I picked up my little beaded purse and walked toward the head table. A few people turned to look. Mark's eyes widened in surprise. I didn't stop at his table. I walked right up to the microphone. It let out a little squeal as I adjusted it. The room went quiet. The spotlight found me, and it was surprisingly warm on my face. "Good evening," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I'm Helen, Mark's mother." I smiled, a small, polite smile. What a beautiful wedding, for a beautiful couple, starting a beautiful life in their beautiful new home. I paused and looked right at Mark and Jessica. Their smiles were frozen on their faces. "A home I was so happy to help you with," I continued, my voice clear and steady. "So for my wedding gift to you both, I want to say this. The loan is forgiven. You don't owe me another penny. Consider it paid in full. Congratulations." I placed the microphone back in its stand. I did not look at my son's pale face or his bride's open mouth. I turned and walked, not back to my little table by the kitchen, but straight toward the grand exit doors. The cool night air felt wonderful. A taxi I had called 20 minutes earlier was waiting at the curb, just as I'd asked. The driver opened the door for me. I got in, and as we pulled away, I watched the Grand Hotel shrink in the rearview mirror until it was just another light in the city. I didn't look back. The taxi ride home was quiet. The driver kept his eyes on the road. The city lights blurred into long streaks of red and gold through the window. I rested my head against the cool glass. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. I just felt empty, like a house after everyone has gone home. When we arrived at my building, I paid the driver and walked into the lobby. The familiar smell of old carpets and air freshener greeted me. In my apartment, I slipped off my shoes by the door. The silence was complete. I walked through the small living room, my stocking feet sinking into the rug. I sat in my armchair, the one with the worn, soft arms. I didn't turn on the light. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, then faded away. My phone, tucked in my purse, did not ring. The whole world, it seemed, was holding its breath. I woke up the next morning before my alarm clock. Sunshine was pouring onto my kitchen floor. For a moment, I forgot everything. Then it came back to me. The wedding, the microphone, the taxi. I got out of bed and my bones ached a little. I am 72 after all. On the kitchen counter, my phone lay screen down. I turned it over. 23 missed calls. A long list of text messages, all from Mark. I didn't read them. I pushed a button on the side until the screen went dark. Then I made coffee. The gurgle of the machine was a friendly, familiar sound. I poured it into my favorite blue mug and sat at my table, looking out the window. It was a beautiful day. The sky was clear. I felt a strange sense of calm. I had a whole day ahead of me, and no one to please but myself. Around noon, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friendly little ding-dong. It was a long, angry buzz. I knew who it was. I opened the door. Mark stood there, his face puffy and pale. He was still wearing his tuxedo pants, wrinkled now, with a rumpled dress shirt. He looked like he hadn't slept. "What was that?" he said. His voice was rough. "What did you think you were doing?" I was giving you your wedding present, I said, keeping my voice level. I didn't invite him in. A present? You got up in front of all our friends, all of Jessica's family, and you humiliated us. You made a scene and then you just walked out. I was seated by the kitchen doors, Mark. It was hard to feel like part of the family, I said softly. He waved his hand, dismissing it. That was just a mistake with the seating chart. You're my mother. You're supposed to be supportive. You're supposed to help. He ran his hands through his messy hair. Do you have any idea how this looks? I looked at my son, my only child. I saw a stranger who was worried about how things looked. Yes, I said. I think I do. I started to close the door. Goodbye, Mark. He stared, shocked, as the door clicked shut in his face. The next day I went to the bank. The air inside was cool and smelled of paper. I sat across the big wooden desk from Mr. Henderson, the manager. He was a kind man who always asked about my garden. Helen, he said with a smile, what can we do for you? I pushed a piece of paper across the desk. It was the loan statement for the house. I want to pay this off, I said. His smile tightened. He looked at the paper, then at me over his glasses. All of it? Helen, that's a very large sum. That's your nest egg. My nest is empty now, Robert, I said. It's time I stopped putting worms in it. He looked at me, a little confused, but he saw the look in my eyes. He sighed and turned to his computer. The only sound was the clicking of his keyboard. He printed out a form. I signed it. He stamped it, hard. The thud of the stamp echoed in the quiet bank. He handed me a receipt that said, "Paid in full." It was just a thin piece of paper, but it felt solid in my hand. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home. The bright lights and cheerful music felt strange after the quiet of the bank. I pushed a cart down the aisle, picking up a few things. Milk, bread, a carton of eggs. Then I saw the flowers. A big bucket of yellow daisies, bright as the sun. I never bought flowers for myself. My husband, Frank, used to bring them home. I picked out the best bunch. As I stood in the checkout line, Carol from apartment 3C got in line behind me. "Daisies?" she said. "Is it your birthday, Helen?" "No," I said, placing them on the conveyor belt. "It's just a Tuesday." She smiled. "Those are the best reasons." Back home, I put the daisies in a tall glass vase and set them in the middle of my kitchen table. They lit up the whole room. I sat down with a cup of tea and just looked at them. The house was quiet. My phone was still turned off. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like something was missing. It felt full. A week passed. The yellow daisies on my table began to droop, one by one. I threw them out. My phone remained off, silent in a drawer. The quiet of the apartment was my new companion. Some days it was peaceful. Other days, it was just lonely. I started cleaning. I went through closets, dusting off boxes I hadn't opened in years. I found my old photo albums. I sat on the floor, the rough carpet scratching my legs, and opened one. There was Mark, a little boy with a gap-toothed smile, holding up a string of fish he'd caught with his father. There I was, younger, my hair still brown, smiling at the camera. We looked so happy. I traced the outline of my husband's face with my finger. The glossy paper was cool to the touch. What would Frank have said about all this? He always said I was too soft. "You're a good woman, Helen," he used to say. "But your heart is a library book. You let everyone check it out." A thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. My address was written on the front in perfect calligraphy. I recognized the handwriting. It was my own. It was one of the leftover wedding invitations. I opened it. Inside was a note from Jessica. "Helen, it began. There was no dear. I am writing to express how deeply hurt we are. You caused an unforgivable scene at our wedding. You embarrassed Mark, and you embarrassed me in front of my family. All we ever did was love you and include you. We thought of you as the heart of our family. I hope you will find it in your heart to apologize for the pain you caused. I read the letter twice. The heavy paper felt cold and stiff. It didn't mention the money. It didn't mention the table by the kitchen. It smelled faintly of her expensive perfume. I folded it neatly, put it back in its envelope, and tore it into 4 perfect squares. Then I dropped them in the trash can under the sink. The next day, I turned my phone back on. It buzzed and beeped for a full minute as old messages loaded. I ignored them all and looked up a number for my cousin, Sarah. She lived 3 states away. We only talked at Christmas and on birthdays. She had been at the wedding, sitting at a much better table. She answered on the second ring. "Helen? Is everything all right?" "I'm fine, Sarah. I needed to hear a friendly voice." There was a pause. I could hear the sound of her television in the background. "I saw what you did at the wedding," she said, her voice low. "Good for you." I felt a knot in my chest loosen. "They've been walking all over you for years," she continued. "Mark is a sweet boy, but that wife of his, she sees you as an open wallet." "He said I was supposed to be supportive," I whispered. Sarah snorted. "Supportive isn't the same as silent. You know, I was talking to my daughter about it. She said something that stuck with me." Another pause. She said, "Grandma Helen's worth is not a savings account for their mistakes." And she's right. I closed my eyes. The words hung in the air, simple and true. My phone rang 2 days later. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. It was Jessica's mother, Diane. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Helen, dear, I was just calling to see how you are. We were all so worried when you rushed out of the wedding." "I am perfectly fine, Diane. Thank you for your concern." I kept my voice flat. "Oh, good," she chirped. "Jessica is just beside herself. She thinks the world of you, you know. She told me she always said you were the one who held the family together. She's just hoping you'll come to your senses soon and smooth things over." I pictured Jessica's perfect smile. I remembered her words drifting from my kitchen. That's what grandmas are for. "I have come to my senses, Diane," I said. "That's the whole problem." I hung up before she could reply. On Friday, I walked down to the community centre. I hadn't been inside in years. The air smelled of floor wax and coffee. A bulletin board was covered in flyers: pottery class, chair yoga, a book club, a bus trip to see the autumn leaves. I stood there for a long time, just looking. A woman with short silver hair and bright red glasses came and stood next to me. "Thinking of joining?" she asked. Her voice was cheerful. "I'm just looking," I said. "The pottery class is fun," she said, pointing a finger with a bright pink nail. "You get your hands dirty. You make something that wasn't there before." She smiled at me. "My name's Margaret." "Helen?" I said. "Well, Helen," she said, patting my arm. "Life's too short to just look." She walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of cinnamon. I looked at the sign-up sheet for the pottery class. There was 1 spot left. I picked up the pen that was attached by a string and wrote my name. The first pottery class was on a Tuesday morning. The room smelled of damp earth and something metallic, like rain on a tin roof. Big windows let in the morning light, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Margaret was already there, wearing a clay-smeared apron over her clothes. She waved when I came in. Glad you made it, Helen, she said, her red glasses perched on her nose. Grab a wheel. I sat down at the strange little machine. The instructor, a young man with a kind face, gave us each a heavy, wet lump of clay. It was cold and firm in my hands. He showed us how to center it on the wheel. My first attempt was a disaster. The clay wobbled and then flew off, splatting against a plastic shield. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. Happens to everyone, Margaret called from her wheel, where a respectable little bowl was already taking shape. Just scrape it up and try again. I did. The second time, the clay stayed on the wheel. As it spun under my wet hands, I felt a strange focus settle over me. The whir of the motor was the only sound. I wasn't thinking about Mark or Jessica. I was just thinking about the pressure of my fingers, trying to coax this shapeless lump into something. It was my lump of clay, mine to shape, or mine to ruin. For years, my life had been shaped by other people's needs, their wants, their emergencies. I was the raw material for their comfort. I looked down at my hands, covered in grey mud. A thought came to me, clear as a church bell on a Sunday morning. My worth was not a line of credit for their happiness. A few days later, Mark called. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. His voice was different, not angry anymore. It was quiet, almost sad. "Mum," he said, "are you there?" "I'm here, Mark. I just wanted to call, to see how you are." I could hear the television on in the background, a game show probably. "We miss you," he said. The words sounded rehearsed. "Jessica feels terrible. She cries about it." I didn't say anything. I just listened to the silence stretch between us. "And Mum?" he said, his voice dropping lower. "Things are a little tight right now. Without your help with the mortgage payment, it's a lot." He was waiting for me to offer, to step back into my old role, the safety net. "You're a resourceful man, Mark," I said, my voice calm. "You have a good job. You and Jessica will figure it out." I did not raise my voice. I did not sound angry. I sounded like a woman stating a fact. "I have to go now. Goodbye." I hung up the phone and went to water my plants. The next week, I had to go to the pharmacy. The air inside was sterile and cool. As I waited for my blood pressure prescription, I saw Eleanor Gable from my old church. She was a woman who collected gossip like some people collect stamps. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Helen, dear, it's been ages. We were so worried." She patted my arm, her touch light and dry like a dead leaf. "We heard there was a bit of drama at Mark's wedding." Her eyes were wide with curiosity. I gave her a small, pleasant smile. "It was a beautiful ceremony. Jessica was a stunning bride." "Oh yes, but I heard you made quite the speech and then vanished," she pressed, leaning in closer. I could smell her minty breath. "I just wanted to wish them well and give them my gift," I said smoothly, taking the small white paper bag from the pharmacist. "You know how it is at my age. I get tired early." I smiled again, a smile that offered nothing more. "It was lovely to see you, Eleanor." I walked away, feeling her disappointed eyes on my back. Margaret from pottery class called me on Thursday. "A few of us are getting together for our book club," she said. "We're meeting at the library. We'd love for you to come. No pressure to have read the book. We mostly just talk and eat cookies." The library was one of my favorite places. The smell of old paper and binding glue always comforted me. There were 4 other women there, all around my age. They greeted me with warm smiles. We sat around a big oak table, and a woman named Judy passed around a plate of lemon bars. They were delicious. We talked about the book a little, but mostly we talked about our gardens, a new show on public television, and the best way to get a grass stain out of jeans. No one asked me about my son. No one wanted anything from me. It felt easy, like breathing. That Saturday afternoon, my doorbell buzzed. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and my heart gave a little jump. It was Jessica. She was holding a large, potted white orchid. Her face was pale and her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. I opened the door. "Hello, Jessica." "Helen," she said, her voice thick. She tried to give me a hug, but I stood my ground. "Can I come in? Please?" I stepped aside, but I didn't close the door all the way. She placed the orchid on my small entryway table. It looked alien and perfect among my simple things. "I am so, so sorry," she began, tears welling up in her eyes again. "For everything. I never wanted you to feel unwelcome. It was a mistake with the seating chart, a terrible mistake." I looked at her, at this beautiful young woman in my hallway. "The table wasn't a mistake, Jessica," I said, my voice quiet but firm. It was a message, and I received it. Her face crumpled. "But we need you," she whispered, reaching for my hand. "I need you. I don't have a mother. Not really. I always thought of you as my mom." I looked at the perfect, waxy petals of the orchid. Then I looked back at her. "You have a mother, Jessica, and I am Mark's mother." I gently pulled my hand away. "And I am very, very tired." Jessica left the orchid, but I did not keep it. The next morning, I carried the heavy ceramic pot down to the lobby of my building. It was a beautiful plant, I had to admit. Its white flowers looked like they were carved from soap. I placed it on the table next to the mailboxes, where everyone could see it. I didn't leave a note. The plant didn't belong to me, so I couldn't give it away. But I could abandon it in a nice neighborhood. Later that day, Carol from 3C saw me by the elevator. "Helen, did you see that gorgeous orchid downstairs? Someone must have a secret admirer." "It is lovely, isn't it?" I said, smiling. "I hope someone gives it a good home." The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and I stepped inside. I felt lighter than I had in days. My Social Security check arrived on the 3rd of the month, as it always did. I sat at my kitchen table with my checkbook and a pile of bills. The numbers were different now, tighter. Paying off Mark's loan had not been a small thing. It was a choice, and choices have consequences. I looked at my budget. There would be no new lavender dress this year, no weekend trips to the coast. I thought about the ice sculpture at the wedding, the swan. It cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to be. I remembered Jessica's voice on the phone, so casual. "The budget is fine." It was fine because I was the budget. I picked up my pen and wrote a check for the electric company. My handwriting was steady. I didn't feel regret. I just felt awake. My sister-in-law, Brenda, called on Saturday. She was my late husband's sister. Her voice was always a little too loud, as if she were speaking across a crowded room. "Helen? I talked to Mark. He's a wreck." "Hello, Brenda," I said, picturing her in her floral print kitchen, a cordless phone pressed to her ear. "He told me what you did. I have to say, I'm shocked. He's your son, your only son. To embarrass him like that and then to cut him off completely." She took a breath. "People are talking. They're saying you're not well." "I am perfectly well, Brenda. In fact, I haven't felt this clear-headed in years." "But he needs you. That's what a mother is for, to be there for her children." There it was again, that same idea, just in a different dress. "He is 34 years old," I said calmly. "He has a wife and a very expensive house. He doesn't need a mother. He needs a bank. And I have retired from that position. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard a click. She had hung up on me. After pottery class, Margaret and I started going for coffee. We went to a small cafe down the street that always smelled of cinnamon and baked bread. We'd sit by the window and watch people walk by. This time I had made a small, lopsided bowl. It was blue. I was very proud of it. "So?" Margaret said, stirring her latte. The little spoon clinked against the ceramic mug. "Are you going to tell me what's going on? Or are we going to keep pretending you just woke up one day and decided to become an artist?" I smiled and took a sip of my coffee. It was hot and strong. "I just decided I was tired of being useful," I said. I wanted to be interesting instead, even if it was just to myself. Margaret looked at me over her red glasses. "Being useful is overrated," she said. "It's a trap for women our age. They expect you to knit and bake and babysit until you drop. But you're not a public utility, Helen. You're a person." She took a big bite of her scone. "And I think you're very interesting." That evening, I got a letter from a law firm. The envelope was thick and expensive. My hands trembled a little as I opened it. It was from a lawyer representing Mark and Jessica. It was full of complicated words, but the message was simple. They were accusing me of emotional distress. They suggested that my gift was a form of manipulation. They wanted me to sign an agreement promising not to contact them and to return certain family heirlooms that were in my possession. They meant my mother's pearls and my husband's silver cufflinks, which I had planned to give Mark one day. I read the letter 3 times. Then I walked over to my little wooden jewelry box. I took out the pearls. They were cool and heavy in my hand. I thought of my mother wearing them. I thought of giving them to Jessica. I put them back in the box and closed the lid. They were not asking. They were demanding. And I knew, right then, that I would not be giving them anything ever again. I held the lawyer's letter in my hand. The paper was thick, with a fancy letterhead at the top. It felt heavy, but not as heavy as my heart had been. I read it again in the bright morning light of my kitchen. Emotional distress. The words seemed ridiculous. Who was the one sitting by the kitchen doors? Who was the one whose savings were now just a receipt in a drawer? I folded the letter and put it in my purse. I looked up the number for a lawyer my friend Margaret had mentioned. His name was Mr. Davies. His office was downtown, in an old brick building. The air inside smelled of leather and old books. He was a younger man than I expected, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He read the letter from Mark's lawyer. His face showed nothing. "This is nonsense, Helen," he said, placing it on his polished desk. "It's a bullying tactic. They have no case." "They want my mother's pearls," I said. My voice was small. "They can want whatever they like," he said. "The question is, what do you want?" He leaned forward. "This is a good opportunity, you know, to get your affairs in order, to make sure your wishes are clear and legally protected." I knew what he meant. My will. The one that left everything to Mark. The holiday season was approaching. The stores started playing Christmas music too early, as they always do. Then came the phone call I was expecting. It was Mark. His voice was bright and false. "Mom, hi. We were just talking about Thanksgiving. You're coming, of course. It's at our house this year." I was quiet for a moment. I could hear Jessica whispering in the background. "It's tradition," he added quickly. "It wouldn't be the same without you." "I see," I said. My little blue pottery bowl was on the counter, holding my car keys. It was crooked, but it was strong. "What time should I be there?" 2 o'clock, he said, relief flooding his voice. Oh, that's great, Mum. That's really great. And could you bring your sweet potato casserole? You know, the one with the marshmallows? Jessica tried to make it, but it's just not the same. Of course, I said. That's what grandmas are for, right? To make the casserole. The line went silent for a second. He didn't know what to say to that. I'll see you then, Mark. I hung up the phone. I made an appointment with Mr. Davies for the following Tuesday. I wore my good navy blue suit. I sat across from him at his big desk. He had papers laid out in front of me. A new will, a durable power of attorney. He explained everything in simple terms. Are you sure about this, Helen? He asked gently. He pointed to the section about the main beneficiary. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. I picked up the heavy black pen. I signed my name on each line he showed me. My signature was clear and strong. I was leaving my apartment, my savings, everything, to the local animal shelter. My husband, Frank, had loved that place. We'd gotten our old dog, Buster, from there. It was a good place. It was a place that was grateful for what it was given. On Thanksgiving morning, my apartment filled with the smell of cinnamon and brown sugar. I pulled the sweet potato casserole from the oven. The marshmallows on top were perfectly toasted. I covered it with foil and put it in an insulated bag. I put on a simple wool dress and my comfortable shoes. In my purse, along with my wallet and my keys, I placed a crisp, sealed envelope. I drove to their house. The neighborhood was full of big, new homes, each with a perfect lawn. Mark opened the door before I could even ring the bell. He gave me a stiff hug. Mum, you made it. It smells delicious. The house was warm and loud. Jessica's mother, Diane, was there, and Brenda, my sister-in-law. They all greeted me with tight smiles. Jessica took the casserole from me with a big, bright, "Oh, Helen, you saved the day." She placed it on the granite island in her enormous kitchen. I was an honored guest today. I was the woman with the famous casserole. I was not the woman by the kitchen door. Not yet. We sat down to eat. The turkey was carved. The wine was poured. Mark tapped his glass with a fork. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, looking at me. "To Mom. For being here. For being family. We love you." Everyone murmured their agreement. They all looked at me, their faces full of expectation. I smiled. "Thank you, Mark. It's good to put all that unpleasantness behind us." I took a sip of my water. After the pumpkin pie was served, and everyone was full and sleepy, Mark cleared his throat. "Mum," he said, trying to sound casual. "About that legal letter. It was just a formality, a misunderstanding. If you could just send over those heirlooms, we can have our lawyers draw up a simple agreement, and this will all be over." I looked at him. I looked at Jessica, who was nodding eagerly. I looked at Diane and Brenda, who were watching me like hawks. "There's no need for that," I said calmly. I reached into my purse and took out the envelope. It wasn't addressed to Mark. It was addressed to his lawyer. I had my own lawyer draw up a response. I placed the envelope on the table next to my empty pie plate. "This is a copy for you. It clarifies my position on the heirlooms. It also includes a summary of my new will, which has been filed with my attorney. I wanted you to have it, so there are no misunderstandings in the future." Silence fell over the table. The only sound was the hum of the expensive refrigerator. Mark stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. Jessica's perfect smile had vanished. She slowly reached out and picked it up. Her hands trembled as she opened it. I watched the color drain from her face as she read. I stood up and gathered my purse. "Thank you for dinner." I said to the silent room. The turkey was lovely. I walked to the door, put on my coat, and let myself out into the cold, crisp air. I didn't need a taxi this time. I had my own car, and I knew exactly where I was going. The drive home from Thanksgiving was quiet. The streets were dark and mostly empty. The car's heater hummed softly, warming my cold hands. I didn't turn on the radio. When I got back to my apartment, the silence felt different. It wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was a peaceful one. I took off my coat and hung it in the closet. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, was dark and quiet. They hadn't called. They hadn't texted. A chapter had closed. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat in my favorite armchair, and watched the city lights flicker outside my window. The phone finally rang the next afternoon. It was Mark. I let it ring until the last possible moment, then answered. I didn't say hello. I just waited. "An animal shelter?" he yelled. There was no greeting. "You're leaving everything to a bunch of stray dogs?" I could hear Jessica sobbing dramatically in the background. "After everything we've done for you?" "What have you done for me, Mark?" I asked. My voice was even. "We included you. We made you part of our lives. A grandmother is supposed to take care of her family, her legacy, not this." "My legacy is my own," I said. "And my mother's pearls are not your wife's property. They belong to me. My decision is final." I did not wait for him to yell again. I pressed the red button on the screen and ended the call. Then I turned the ringer off. The silence that followed was a relief, like taking off a pair of shoes that were 2 sizes too small. A week before Christmas, Margaret invited me to a holiday potluck at her apartment. Her home was small and cozy, and it smelled of pine needles and cinnamon. A little silver Christmas tree blinked with coloured lights on a side table. The women from my book club were there, and a few others from the pottery class. They all brought something. Judy made her famous lemon bars, this time dusted with powdered sugar to look like snow. I brought a simple cheese plate. We sat in her warm living room, drinking mulled cider from mismatched mugs. We talked about our children and grandchildren, but in a gentle way. No one bragged. No one complained for too long. At one point, Judy turned to me. "Are you seeing your son for Christmas, Helen?" I took a sip of my cider. The mug was warm in my hands. "No, dear," I said. "They're celebrating with Jessica's family this year." The women just nodded. No one pried. No one gave me a pitying look. They just passed me the plate of cookies. I saw Jessica at the grocery store a few days later. I was in the produce section, trying to decide between a red apple and a green one. I heard a familiar, sharp click of heels on the linoleum floor. I looked up. She was standing at the end of the aisle, pushing a cart piled high with fancy cheeses and organic vegetables. Our eyes met for just a second. Her face, which was always arranged in a perfect smile, turned hard and ugly. She said nothing. She just turned her cart so sharply that one of the wheels squeaked in protest and disappeared down the next aisle. I stood there for a moment, holding an apple in my hand. I felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger. Just a quiet sense of distance. I chose the red apple and put it in my basket. On New Year's Eve, I did something I hadn't planned. I drove to the animal shelter. It was the place I had named in my will, but I had never actually been inside. The air was filled with the sound of barking and the clean, sharp smell of disinfectant. It wasn't sad, like I thought it might be. It was busy and full of life. I walked down a hallway lined with cages. A young volunteer was patiently mopping the floor. "Can I help you, Mum?" she asked with a friendly smile. I'm just looking, I said. I stopped in front of a cage in a quieter section. Inside, an old grey cat was curled up on a soft blanket. He was missing one ear, and his fur was a little patchy. He opened one green eye and looked at me, then closed it again, as if he had decided I wasn't worth the trouble. A little card on his cage said his name was Gus. It said he was 12 years old, and his owner had passed away. He's a grumpy old man, the volunteer said, coming to stand beside me. He doesn't show well. Most people want the kittens. I watched the old cat breathe, in and out. He seemed so peaceful. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just being himself. I'll take him, I said. The words surprised me as much as they surprised the young woman. I think we'll get along just fine. Bringing Gus home changed the feeling of my apartment. His presence filled the quiet spaces. At first, he hid under the sofa, a grumpy shadow in the dust bunnies. But after a few days, he started to venture out. I would wake up in the morning to find him sleeping at the foot of my bed, a warm, rumbling weight on my ankles. The sound of his purr was the best kind of silence. I started volunteering at the animal shelter twice a week. I didn't clean cages. My back isn't what it used to be. Instead, I sat in a comfortable armchair in a small, quiet room and read books out loud to the shyest cats. Margaret thought it was hilarious. First pottery, now you're a cat librarian, she said over coffee. What's next? Are you going to join a motorcycle gang? Don't tempt me, I said, and we both laughed. It felt good to laugh like that, from the belly. One afternoon at the shelter, a young couple came in. They looked worried. Their old dog had passed away, and their little girl was heartbroken. They were looking for a new friend for her. The shelter manager, a kind woman named Susan, brought out a little terrier mix with big, floppy ears. The little girl's face lit up, but the parents looked at the adoption fee paperwork with long faces. We just had some car trouble, the young man said quietly to Susan. I don't get paid until Friday. Can we reserve him? Susan shook her head sadly. I'm sorry, we can't do holds. It's first come, first served. I was sitting in my reading chair, pretending to be interested in my book. I watched the little girl's face start to crumple. I thought of Mark and Jessica and their endless river of wants. This felt different. This was a small, simple need. I walked over to the counter. I'd like to make a donation, I said to Susan, my voice low. I wrote a check for the amount of the adoption fee. Use it for this family. I didn't wait for them to thank me. I just smiled at the little girl and went back to my book. My cousin Sarah called me a few months later. You're not going to believe this, she said, her voice crackling with news. Mark and Jessica are selling the house. Oh? I said, stroking Gus, who was curled in my lap. Yes, Brenda told me. Apparently they couldn't keep up with the payments and the property taxes and all the rest of it. They're moving into a condo, a much smaller one. She paused. Brenda said Jessica is furious. She keeps saying it's all your fault. I looked out my window. The spring sunshine was making the leaves on the trees look bright green. Well, I said, I suppose in a way she's right. I wasn't happy they were struggling. But I wasn't sad either. I was just separate from it. It was their life, their choices. My name was no longer on their paperwork. My 73rd birthday arrived on a sunny day in May. I didn't want a party. Instead, Margaret and I took a bus trip with the senior centre to the botanical gardens. The air smelled of damp earth and roses. We walked along the paths, pointing out the different flowers. We saw a man about our age, with a kind face and a nice smile, sketching the lily pads in a little notebook. He nodded at us as we passed. Margaret nudged me with her elbow. "He's cute," she whispered. "Hush, you," I said, but I smiled. We found a bench in the shade and sat down. I had packed a small lunch, tuna sandwiches and a thermos of iced tea. It was simple, but it was perfect. I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The last year had been a storm, but the storm had passed. It had washed everything clean. I was no longer a safety net, or a budget, or a convenience. I was just Helen, a woman who liked pottery and old cats and tuna sandwiches in the sun. I looked at the garden, at all the things growing, each in its own time. The sun was warm on my face. I thought about the wedding, about the table by the kitchen. It seemed like a story that had happened to someone else, a long, long time ago. I was here now. I was calm. I was free. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like I was finally, truly, home.